for me, faithfulness is following God right here and right now. And that may mean my path looks very differently. I
Yeah,
think
yeah, yeah,
Jesus
yeah,
showed
yeah.
us that, right? Jesus showed us that way that, I mean, people were expecting him to come and to be a king and a leader in a certain way. And he did something very different. And his
Yeah,
trajectory went, to riding on a donkey,
yeah,
to
yeah,
enter Jerusalem. And so I don't want to compare myself to Jesus, but just to say that sometimes following God takes us on paths that
yeah.
don't match what the culture might say.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Up Next. Today I get a chance to talk with a new friend, Meryl Herr from Athens, Georgia. Meryl, I've never been to Athens, Georgia. Tell me about Athens, Georgia.
Yeah, so Athens, Georgia is about an hour 30 minutes east of Atlanta, which most people know, in Georgia. And it is the home of the University of Georgia and the Georgia Bulldogs. And
Yes,
so it
yes.
is
I love watching this team.
yeah, it's a very fun college town. It's very vibrant when the students are here and school is in session. And in the summer, it gets very quiet.
Mm, very, very nice. Yeah, how long have you lived over in Athens?
Yeah, we moved here in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, for my husband to start his PhD at the university.
Very good. And I know a lot of times we're going to talk a little bit about some of the places that you lived in Chicago and Birmingham, Alabama, and all this stuff. Where is home for you? Where would you consider home? And of all the cities, which one was your favorite to live in?
Oh, that's such a great question. Um, I think Birmingham is always going to feel like home because that's where my entire extended family is. So I lived in Birmingham from the time I was 2 until I went off to college at 18. Yeah, with all of my family still there, it feels like home, but not in the same way because I've lived away from it for so long. And I talk about that a little bit in the book about how moving away from those places that you call home causes some displacement, meaning that you don't feel as connected in the same way. Um, yeah, I think of the favorite places that I've lived. I deeply loved Kansas City. My husband and I went there for 2 years after seminary for a pastoral residency. And we loved everything about the area, great sports culture, arts culture, really fun neighborhoods. It was really growing. Kansas City's grown even so much more since we've been there. And then most recently, we lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We lived there for about 8 years.
Wow.
And
Okay.
at first, I really didn't like living in Michigan. One of the things that I learned early on was that Michigan doesn't have a lot of transients, meaning not a lot of people that are in Michigan move out of Michigan. And so
Mm,
it can make it hard to move into Michigan as an outsider because you're just outside of that culture. You don't know where places are. It took me a really long time to learn the geography, to learn about that upper Midwestern culture. Even though I had lived in Chicago, Grand Rapids is very different
very
from that.
different. Yes.
Yeah, and
Yes.
but we made a home there and got really invested in our neighborhood. We lived in a city neighborhood called it was the Alger Heights Garfield Park, which is a really fun area south of the city in Grand Rapids, and being able to walk to the library, to walk my kids to elementary school, to walk to what was called the Croc Center, which was like the gym and the
Yeah.
pool and where you could
Mhm.
play sports and playgrounds. That walkable neighborhood, the deep investment in neighbors there was just a lot of fun. But I don't miss, the 100 inches of snow we would get in the winter.
Very, very nice. And Meryl, side note, a lot of times before, I'm sure a lot of times with the Georgia Bulldogs and Alabama football season probably is a little hard for you when you're dealing with that.
Oh, yeah, that's so funny and so true. Yeah, so I am an Alabama fan, so roll tide. And my husband has rooted for Alabama our entire marriage until he started going to school at the University of Georgia. And so now he has a ton of Georgia Bulldogs gear. And he actually has a part time job working in the athletic department right now, working with some of the athletes. And so We are a house divided during the NCAA
Yes.
football season. So,
Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes, yes. And Meryl, what are you doing right now? I mean, there's your bio that you have in your book, but there are probably changes going on in your life. Talk to me a little bit about your work journey and what you're up to now.
Yeah, that's so great. Thanks for asking, Tommy. So, as the time we're recording right now, right, which will probably be different from when this goes live, is this is actually my last week working for Fuller Seminary. So, for the past 3.5 years, I have been the director of research and resources at Fuller. At the Max Dupree Center for Leadership, which is
Yeah,
a center within Fuller
yeah.
Seminary that focuses on helping marketplace leaders connect their
Hmm.
faith with
Hmm.
their work. And so we have just done so much exciting work there. We've done several research studies. We've created a whole lot of resources, training materials for marketplace leaders. And now I'm stepping away to go back into consulting full time. And consulting was something I did before I came to the Dupree Center. So I'm actually, in some ways, I feel like resurrecting a consulting business that has just kind of lingered behind the scenes for a while. But my consulting group is called the Good Works Group. It's just me, so don't let the word group in there throw you off. I named it group eventually. I named it group from the outset because I wanted there to be space to grow. So maybe it will be more than me at some point. And from time to time, there
Hmm.
are other freelance consultants that I'll bring on to
Yeah.
help on projects. But yeah, I'm doing educational program planning and evaluation, which means helping nonprofits think about how they're going to educate and form the people entrusted to their care.
Yeah, yeah, very good. And even your time as I know you're wrapping up things with Fuller, with Michaela and Mark and all those guys. Is what what were some of the products that you guys were producing that you felt like people needed? And was there a product or research that surprised you? You said, "Oh, that was different than what I thought it was going to be." What
Oh,
was your
yeah.
experience like?
Yeah, that's so fascinating. It's such a great question. So, I'll start with the research. So, I oversaw all of our research and had my hands in most of it while I was there over the 3.5 years. I didn't conduct all of it, but I had my hands in most of it. So, we did three big projects that I was a part of. One was our Flourishing Leaders research, which was really fantastic. We got a great picture through some focus groups and some interviews on what it means to be a flourishing Christian marketplace leader today. And so that was just a really fun project and got to talk to some amazing people. I remember during the interviews a couple of times just either wanting to be mentored by the person I was interviewing because they seemed to have just such a deep commitment to Christ and such a way of bringing the kingdom values out in the way they were leading their organizations. Or I would just well up with tears at hearing their stories of the ways they chose to follow Christ in leading their organizations, sometimes when it was really, really hard. So that was a deep joy. And the other two studies that we did, I did two big mentoring studies, and we produced a ton of research on and resources on mentoring. So
Mm,
some of my favorites actually are some of our mentoring resources because mentoring is so important. You know,
yeah,
we need mentors. We
yeah,
can't
yeah.
do life without people speaking into our lives. And so often we think it's got to be this big formal thing where we're meeting, every 2 weeks and have this curriculum to go through, and the mentor has to check all these boxes. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It can be casual conversation between two people who want to build a relationship and one wants to learn from the other. And so mentoring is something so vital. So we created a course, a 4-week course called Alongside, that was for people who were reluctant to be mentors, but were curious enough to want to find out more and perhaps step into a mentoring relationship. And I loved teaching that. We taught it via Zoom several times,
Mm,
and it was just so much fun. And then we also did a mentoring skills workshop, which was a lot of fun. So, really focusing on asking good questions and listening well in the context of a
very good.
mentoring relationship. And those are fun. And then the final study that actually I'm still wrapping up, even as I transition out of the Dupree Center, is a research project on joy. And we looked at how Christian executive level leaders experience joy in the context of their work. And that was really, really fun. It was, I'd probably have to go back and look at my notes to tell you what exactly was surprising about that in terms of the findings. But one thing that surprised me was how much I needed to do that study.
Got it.
Yeah.
Meryl, a lot of times with all these studies, how did you guys decide what studies to look at? Was it people around and you just threw ideas on the table and then sit there and say, okay, this is the one we're going to focus on. This one is, how did you figure out, like joy? Is this something that you realize, wow, people really struggle with this? We got to talk about that. How did you figure it out?
Yeah, so sometimes some of the projects that I stepped into had already been in motion to some extent before I got to the Dupree Center. And so Mark, the previous executive director, Michaela, current executive director, had written some grant proposals for
Yeah.
some foundations around some of the research. But the Joy study was a little bit unique in that it actually came out of the first part of the Flourishing Leaders research. So Michaela and I, at the very beginning of that research, and that would have been, early 2022, so a couple of years ago now, we led 18 focus groups. And we asked the folks in that focus group, those focus groups, how they would describe a healthy, faithful, and fruitful marketplace leader. We used these fun things called Google Jamboards, which are these interactive whiteboards, and had them post sticky notes. It was so much fun. But once we started analyzing the data and the ideas that they had talked about in terms of healthy, faithful, and fruitful leadership, we noticed that on the fruitful piece, there wasn't a lot of talk of joy. It showed up a couple of times, but it wasn't overwhelming. And we thought that was pretty shocking. And so Michaela who was the current executive director, was talking about that with an individual who's an executive leader. And that CEO said, oh yeah, it is so hard for me to experience joy in the context of my work. Just the grind of being a CEO of this business. It's hard to get to joy. Can I give you some money to go study that? And so that set us on the course of trying to learn more about joy.
Very, very good. Even with your newest book that I just got, When Work Hurts, how did that come about?
It's a great question. It was really a confluence of two things. One was really starting to come to a place of peace and acceptance about my own career journey, which did not go anything like I thought it would have. And just experiencing a lot of hurt, a lot of disappointment and frustration. But really getting to a point a few years ago where I was like, okay, this is my story. I accept it. This is my story. And God's brought me to a place of some healing in some of this. And so how might God want me to steward that healing? And then the other piece was, I had been walking around that neighborhood in Grand Rapids that I described, and I would often listen to my Dwell app, which is a scripture app, and listen to scripture while I was walking. And I was listening to the book of Nehemiah, got to Nehemiah chapter 3. And it was the story of when Nehemiah is leading the people who have returned from exile to rebuild the wall around of Jerusalem, which had been destroyed by the Babylonians. And normally I would not want to read a passage like that. It reads very much like a census. It's very repetitive, and this did this, and this person did this, and this person did this. But I was listening to it, and just something captured my imagination there of, why has no one talked about this story as this beautiful picture of faith and work intersecting? Like, I was like, why? I've read a ton of books about faith and work, and I've been in the faith and work movement for a while now. Why am I not hearing Nehemiah talked about more? And we talk about Nehemiah in terms of leadership often. He's a great example of leadership, but the people's work in rebuilding the wall really captured my imagination, because it wasn't just stonemasons rebuilding the wall. It was people from all different types of occupations coming together, working side by side to rebuild Jerusalem. And I was like, there's something here. And so then I I remember I was at the beach on vacation. I was talking to the Lord in prayer and saying, Lord, I think I'm ready to write a book.
Yeah.
And then I just really got this invitation to try to bring these two ideas together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the part that I loved about it is it's not like this idea Nehemiah 3 just came overnight. Sometimes you got to sit in scripture and reread it and reread it and reread it. And one day you're sitting there, oh my gosh, I never saw this before. And when that just opens up, it is the best feeling you've ever seen or experienced.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Meryl, a lot of times every single year, I'll go and pick one character or one book. Like last year, I looked at First Kings 17, 18, 19 with the life of Elijah. I want to know, what does Elijah teach me as a marketplace leader? I just kept rereading it and rereading it and rereading it. And then one day I was sitting there looking at Hebrews 11 and said, why didn't Hebrews ever mention Elijah?
Hmm.
The only thing he kind of mentioned is the dead were raised, clearly referencing Elijah's healing of the widow's son. I said there, why didn't you mention Elijah by name? And things like that. You just got to wrestle through some of those things. That's the best part of it, Meryl.
Oh, yeah. I love the scriptures. I've always loved the scriptures. I remember my youth pastor in high school. I was working for him as a youth intern during college. And I just remember him saying, you need to read the book of Joshua this summer.
Yeah.
And I started reading the book of Joshua. And all of a sudden I was like, but wait, this connects to Jesus. And he was like, yes,
Yeah.
it does. And my mind and heart just got captivated at that moment with the scriptures. Then going to seminary, I felt even more in love. I'm like, look at this big picture,
Yeah.
this big story that God has told. So yes, I'm like you. I love to devour the scriptures and go deep and really wrestle.
Or even in terms of going back to what you were talking about, Joshua, is yes, it shows Jesus, but there's little stories. Let's say, for instance, when they first pack up to ready to cross to the promised land, you wonder what those guys were thinking about. Many of them have never been in captivity in Egypt as slaves, but now all their life they've known just to live in the wilderness. Now
Oh,
they're
yeah.
going to pack everything and go. What would they think as they cross this Jordan River?
Oh yeah, I actually been rereading Joshua right now. I just started again last week and I have been really stuck on Rahab again, thinking about her, thinking about the details in the story because we often read her story and think, "Oh, Rahab was a prostitute." But you read that she's got her own home and it's her own home that has a rooftop access and that the king and the officials in Jericho know who she is. Like she's prominent. And I was like, oh, we pass her off so often as a probably like a poor marginalized woman, but I don't think that's the case. I think she was probably actually quite a wealthy woman who was well known among the movers and shakers of that time in Jericho. And so I've been thinking, okay, what are the implications for bringing that understanding of
Yeah.
Rahab to the
Yeah,
story?
yeah, yeah. Very, very good. Meryl, you mentioned sometimes some of the hurts or disappointment or things didn't really go into expectations. Talk a little bit about that as a relation to your work journey.
Yeah. I graduated from college and went straight into seminary without a real sense of calling compared to a lot of my friends in
Yeah.
seminary. Like a lot of my friends would be like, oh, I had this really clear call from God to be a pastor. And I really didn't. I just knew I had gifts for ministry and that some people had encouraged me to go to seminary. And I really wanted to learn more about the Bible. And then after seminary, my husband and I had this fantastic opportunity to do a 2-year pastoral residency at Christ Community Church in Kansas City. And it's kind of like the idea of a medical school residency where you're just thrown into leadership within the church, but you have great mentors. And so you're doing pastoral leadership in some really exciting ways, a lot of hands-on work and training. And we did that, and our residency ended in 2009, which is the height of the Great Recession in the United States. And so that meant the economy was really shrinking. People were losing their jobs. Churches were not hiring. We knew a lot of churches that were laying off people, and we both needed jobs at that point. And it was really hard. It took us, I think I think it took us about 9 months for one of us to land a full-time job. And that ended up being my husband, who got a full-time job serving at a church in Springfield, Illinois. And then I was like, well, I'll just get a job when we get to Springfield. And that turned out to be really difficult. Springfield is, it's interesting. It's the capital of the state of Illinois, but it's also very agrarian, and it has a very small town feel. And I just couldn't find a lot of job openings where I felt like I could use my skills and training. And I was applying for all sorts of stuff. And I had worked at a retail clothing store for a little while in Kansas City. I was like, maybe I didn't really want to do that though. Again, I wanted to use something that was using my skills and training that would make a little bit more money and be a little bit more steady. And so, I tried a temp agency, which was a disaster. I remember a couple of folks saying, oh, Meryl needs to go get her PhD. These were professors from when I was in seminary, and they had met with my husband at different events, and they're like, she needs to get her PhD. And I was like, in what? Why? Why for a while. And then that door started to open for me to go back to TEDS at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School and get my PhD. But I was going to be commuting. There was no way for me to get one of the scholarships where you would also work on campus. And I applied really late in the application cycle. So it was just, I was going to have to pay for the whole thing out of my pocket. I just was like, okay, but I got to get a job if we're going to do this, because my husband was a pastor. He wasn't making enough money to support our family and to, afford my tuition. And so I did get a job, and it was for a curriculum company. And I was going to be working on a team of curriculum writers developing middle school math curriculum. And it was a remote job, and it was part-time. And in the 10-month contract that I had, it was going to pay enough for my entire PhD. And I was so excited. It was really fun. I had been a math teacher previously and a math major. So it was a lot of fun using some skills that I had. And then about 6 weeks into the project, I got a phone call that my services were no longer needed because they had to make some cuts. And that was the day before I was supposed to go to PhD orientation. And I tell this story in depth in the book. But that was really hard. And I think it's continued to be hard. There have been many seasons since then where I have needed to look for a full-time job and have applied for tons of jobs that I've been well qualified for and have not been able to even get an interview. I think over the past decade or so, even jobs that I have received people have said such and such recommended you apply for this job. That's happened before. I still can't get an interview in those types of situations. So even when I was starting to apply for my job at Fuller, when we started some conversation about it, it wasn't a posted job. I had just had a conversation with my boss, and they needed some research to be done. And it just so happened that I was a researcher. So we started talking more, and we thought at first that I was going to be consulting with them. But then she said, actually, we want to hire this position. So you would have to go through a hiring process. And I didn't want to, because I was afraid I was going to get rejected again. And so I think there was just so much heartbreak in that rejection. And so I have friends that have been on job searches for 2 years plus, and I feel for them, because it is so hard to face. Sometimes it's not even rejection. Sometimes it's just, you don't even hear anything, right? Yeah. It's just silence on the other end. And it's such a difficult place to be in. I think for me, it was really difficult too, because I was seeing so many of my friends climb the career ladder and doing things that I wanted to do and getting the types of jobs that I wanted to have. And yet I wasn't. My story was panning out very differently.
Meryl, as you look back and you start reflecting upon some of those things, What is God showing you? I mean, whether it's your own insecurities, whether it's your own coming before the Lord, here's what I could do, Lord. Why is there no open doors? He's in the midst of creating something within you. As you look back, what is it he's been trying to say to you?
Mm, it's really good. There's a verse, I think it's in the Psalms, and I could be wrong here. I love the scriptures, but I'm terrible with the addresses of where things live in the scriptures. Um, no good thing does he withhold from them whose walk is upright, or something like that. I think it's in the Psalms. Um, that if God's withholding something, it's probably for a good reason. Um, because he loves me and cares for me, that there's wisdom there and something that he might be withholding. And so trying to reframe rejection as care, I think is one piece of it. And then realizing that my job is to be a faithful steward of the gifts and skills and experiences that God has given me, and not to be faithful to follow somebody else's career path, and to follow a particular journey. That these career paths and career development sequences that we read about on LinkedIn, and this person did this and advanced it this way, that there is a lot of good that can come from that. But for me, faithfulness is following God right here and right now. And that may mean my path looks very differently. I think Jesus showed us that, right? Jesus showed us that way. That, I mean, people were expecting him to come and to be a king and a leader in a certain way, and he did something very different. And his trajectory went to riding on a donkey to enter Jerusalem. And so I don't want to compare myself to Jesus, but just to say that sometimes following God takes us on paths that don't match what the culture might say.
Oh, I mean, as soon as you start talking about it and sharing today, I started thinking about David. I mean, you have this young boy who's out there tending sheep in the shepherd field. His father forgets him. Suddenly he calls him in, and you have this random guy who's a prophet says, "Hey, you're going to be the next king." And that was what he tells you. And then you defeat Goliath, and you're on top of the world. You think everything is going to go well. No, it doesn't go well. And he starts pulling everything from you. And you lost your job. You try going to your wife. It didn't go well. You try running to your best friend. Didn't go well there. You end up in the city of Gath, where you just killed the guy in Goliath. And you end up in the cave of Adullam. And that's when God starts working. And it is so unique, the journey that every single person is on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, David's story is really resonant. And I remember my husband, he was a pastor, and one of his best sermons, his most beloved sermons that he ever preached, was on David in the cave. And, he said, God does his best work in caves. And I think that is so true. I mean, my book wouldn't exist without my story.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it came out of that pain. And so, if that's the way that God is choosing to use me to serve people, it's been painful. But if God's redeeming that pain in a way that is beautiful, like, I'm really honored that he would do that.
Yeah. What does God say? I mean, the one thing I read, I mean, even as I've gone through your book, you're very vulnerable. You're very open. What do you feel like God is saying to you through this pain?
I always come back to one of my favorite stories in scripture, Tommy, and that's in the book of Genesis, and it's the story of Hagar. And she's in a really unfortunate work situation, and it's a work situation where she's not choosing her employer, right? She's a maid servant, and so she does not have the type of agency or freedom to hop to a different job or to go on a career search. She's terribly mistreated and runs away, and God meets her in her pain, in her brokenness, And she says, "You are the God who sees me."
Mm-hmm.
And I have carried that name of God throughout all of my work hurt, because it has cast me into some really dark places emotionally and spiritually, where you're just asking God really hard questions. Um, where are you? Don't you care for me? Don't you want me to succeed?
Yeah.
Don't you, all these really tough questions that sometimes we don't think we should ask God, but we're in these moments of lament, really. And then coming back to, no, but you're the God who sees me. You see this. You see when your children are hurting.
Mm.
And so I also love, I recently wrote a piece. I think it was for Fuller. I was trying to remember the other day where I wrote it, but it was, I think it was a devotion on a passage in Isaiah. And it's this idea that elevation worship captured in a song, Graves into Gardens. The God of the mountain is the God of the valley.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's that same idea that, David talks about in the shepherd's psalm, like, you're with me in the deepest valleys. And I think one of the things that I have learned, and I saw this coming back through my journal this year, is God's constant presence with me. I think that's a theme, that even when I was just totally broken from losing my job, that God was with me in
Mm-hmm.
that moment, and
Mm-hmm.
orchestrating
Mm-hmm.
every step and caring for me in ways that I couldn't even imagine. And then even in the days when I was starting my consulting business and praying that I would get a new client, or praying that my clients would pay me on time so that I could pay our mortgage, right? Like, just all of that stress of getting to the end of the year and working on my taxes and going, oh my gosh, look how much the Lord provided this year. And I stress so much, but I serve a good God who loves me and who is my provider and who has not let me
Yeah.
fall.
Yeah. 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 Meryl, as I hear you talk and I reflect my own journey as you're talking, people always say, God, where were you? God, where were you? You're supposed to provide for me. You're supposed to be there for me. But we have to remember that when God promises that he's going to be there for you, it may not be the way that you think or want him to be there for you, but he's going to be there in a way that it maybe could be unique that you never ever thought of. And
Mm.
are you okay with it if it doesn't go according to plan?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. Meryl, we're running out of time, but we're going to spend some time in the future. I want to bring you on again and talk more. Where can people find you at?
Oh yeah, thanks, Tommy. So a couple of places, merylherr.com. That's MERYLHERR.com. You can go to that website. You can sign up to receive my newsletter, which comes through Substack. You can also find a excerpt of my book on InterVarsity Press website. So you can try before you buy. If you want to read a chapter of the book and see if you like it. And then, Tommy, I'm inviting folks to share their work hurt stories. So you've read the book, you know that there are tons of stories in the book for people who are willing to share their stories with me. I think the more we share our stories, the more we will feel seen, right? We'll feel a sense of solidarity with one another and can really start to serve one another as we heal from our pain. And so if folks have a work hurt story that they want to share with me, they can email me at whenworkhurts@gmail.com.
Yeah.
And I'd be happy to hear their story as it's written in Gmail, and then perhaps share it in a way that protects their identity. I'm not going to talk about their name or their employer, but share it with somebody, because somebody else may find some solidarity and hope.
Very good. When work hurts, building resilience when you're beat up or burnt out. Thank you very, very much. Yeah. We'll talk
Thanks,
soon.
Tommy. Yeah.